The world is facing many large and interconnected problems. Numerous countries across the globe require significant financial assistance to foster growth and development. These nations need substantial capital to build essential infrastructure, fund public health initiatives, expand educational opportunities, and ensure food security for their populations. The European Union stands as one of the wealthiest economic blocs in the world. As such, a global expectation exists for the EU to play a leading role in providing aid to less developed parts of the world. However, the reality is that the EU often contributes less financial support than many observers believe. This essay will carefully follow the complex money trail. It will seek to answer the critical question: is the EU failing to provide sufficient financial assistance to the rest of the world? This analysis will delve into the fundamental structure of the European Union's budget. A key focus will be to show where this money actually goes, and more importantly, where it does not go. We will explore the primary reasons for any shortfalls in effective aid delivery. These reasons are often a complex mix of political maneuvering, burdensome regulations, the crushing weight of international debt, and the overarching influence of private profit motives. By using clear examples and select figures, we can illuminate the mechanisms that prevent aid from reaching its intended recipients. The ultimate goal is to show who truly loses when the promised financial assistance fails to materialize where it is most desperately needed. The European Union has a formal, multi-year budget. This comprehensive financial plan allocates funds for a wide range of internal priorities. Money is designated to support agriculture through the Common Agricultural Policy, to build roads and bridges via structural funds, and to advance scientific research and innovation across the member states. This form of assistance is officially known as Official Development Assistance, ODA. The EU frequently speaks about its commitment to global sustainability goals. These ambitious international targets explicitly call upon wealthy nations and blocs to provide robust support to poorer countries, aiming to achieve objectives like eradicating extreme poverty and hunger. Despite these stated commitments, the actual amount of money that flows from the EU as effective aid can be disappointingly small. Many affluent countries have long pledged to contribute 0.7% of their gross national income, GNI, toward development aid, a target endorsed by the United Nations. Very few individual nations consistently meet this goal. While the EU as a collective body often reports figures that appear closer to this target than many of its individual members, the total aid delivered is frequently less than what was initially promised. Furthermore, the money that does leave Europe sometimes travels through channels that do not prioritize poverty alleviation. Loans, private sector investments. These financial flows can certainly benefit European businesses, but do not always translate into tangible benefits for the poorest people on the ground. To understand where the money goes, one must first understand the EU's primary financial instrument for external action. This is the Neighborhood, Development and International Cooperation Instrument, Global Europe, or NDICI. This massive fund, with a budget of nearly 80 billion euros for the 2021-2027 period, is designed to be the EU's main tool to contribute to eradicating poverty and promoting sustainable development worldwide. It combines what were previously several separate funding streams into one. The intention was to make the EU's external financing more coherent, flexible, strategic. This fund covers everything from long-term development projects in sub-Saharan Africa to supporting political reforms in countries bordering the EU. However, the consolidation of these funds into a single instrument also introduced new complexities and potential conflicts of interest. The NDICI is not solely dedicated to poverty reduction. A significant portion of the budget is allocated to pursue the EU's own strategic interests. This includes migration management, security, promoting European economic and political influence. For example, funds might be used to strengthen border controls in a North African country to curb migration to Europe. While this addresses a political priority for the EU, it does not necessarily align with the most pressing development needs of that country, such as building schools, water sanitation systems. This blending of objectives means that pure development aid can be diluted by other geopolitical goals. Furthermore, a large part of the NDICI budget is channeled through mechanisms that favor private investment. The European Fund for Sustainable Development Plus, EFSD Plus, is a key component of this strategy. It uses public money to de-risk private investments in developing countries. The idea is to use guarantees, blended finance, to attract private companies that would otherwise find these markets too risky. For instance, an EU guarantee might encourage a European energy company to build a solar farm in a developing nation. While this can bring technology and infrastructure, the primary motive is still profit. The financial returns are designed to flow back to the private investors, not necessarily to be reinvested into the local community in a way that directly helps the most vulnerable. This focus on leveraging private finance represents a major shift in development policy. Proponents argue that it unlocks trillions of dollars in private capital that public aid budgets could never match. However, critics point out that this approach tends to favor projects in middle-income countries and sectors that are already profitable, such as energy. Telecommunications. It often overlooks the least developed countries and essential but less profitable sectors like basic healthcare. Primary education. The projects that attract private investors are not always the ones that deliver the greatest social impact. As a result, the poorest of the poor, who live in the most challenging environments, are often left behind by this new financial architecture. The money trail leads to boardrooms, not necessarily to villages. One of the most significant obstacles preventing EU aid from being effective is the practice of imposing conditions. Tied aid conditionalities. In many cases, the financial assistance provided by the EU is not a simple, unconditional grant. Instead, it comes with a set of rules and requirements that the recipient country must follow. They can be political, implement specific governance reforms, align with EU foreign policy positions. They can also be economic liberalized markets, privatize state enterprises, award contracts to European companies. This severely restricts the autonomy of the recipient nation. These conditions can make it incredibly difficult for governments to direct funds toward their most urgent local needs. Another critical issue that diminishes the impact of aid is the overwhelming burden of debt. Many developing countries are trapped in a vicious cycle of borrowing. They must allocate a significant portion of their national budgets not to education or healthcare, but to making interest payments on loans owed to foreign creditors. These creditors include international financial institutions, governments, and private banks, many of which are based in the European Union. When a poor country sends more money back to rich lenders in Europe than it receives in aid, the net flow of capital is reversed. This creates a situation where the developing world is, in effect, financing the developed world. Trade rules established by the EU also play a crucial role in shaping economic outcomes in the developing world. However, they can have detrimental effects on small, local producers. For example, if a trade deal allows for the importation of subsidized agricultural products from Europe, such as milk powder or chicken, local farmers in an African country may find it impossible to compete. Their products become more expensive than the imported goods. They lose their market share and their incomes plummet. Profits are often extracted from the host country and repatriated back to Europe instead of reinvested locally. Jobs created aren't always high quality or sustainable. Local people may be hired for low-wage labor, face poor working conditions, and have limited chances to advance. Extraction of natural resources, minerals, timber, leads to environmental degradation, deforestation, pollution of local water sources, which hits the rural poor hardest. Net impact can be negative for local communities, while foreign firms book substantial profits. The money leaves the country, leaving social and environmental costs behind. A big part of the problem is lack of transparency. It's extremely hard to track the money or assess the true impact of EU-supported private investments. Financial structures are complex, involving offshore accounts and subsidiary companies that obscure profit destinations. Funds labeled development finance may look like aid on paper, but often function as commercial loans or equity investments that mainly benefit European firms. Without clear public reporting, citizens in Europe and in recipient countries can't hold governments or corporations accountable. That opacity lets a helpful narrative persist, even when the reality is extraction. So the distinction between aid and private investment matters. True development aid should strengthen public services and empower the most vulnerable. Private investment seeks financial returns. Conflating them is dangerous. When EU public money guarantees private profits, development becomes secondary. Funded projects are chosen for profit, not for greatest need. A toll road built and run by a European company may generate revenue, but it won't help a remote village that needs a footbridge to reach a clinic. The money trail shows profit over people. The evidence clearly shows that when EU aid is insufficient or poorly designed or diverted, real people suffer the consequences. It means children may not receive life-saving vaccines, girls may be denied an education, and farmers may lose their land and livelihoods, pushed out by subsidized imports and large-scale land acquisitions. The world is also facing a climate crisis that disproportionately harms poor countries which lack the resources to adapt. They desperately need funds to build resilient infrastructure and to secure their food supplies. If the EU fails to provide adequate and effective support, the global gap will grow, fostering instability and inequality. However, this situation is not irreversible. Simple, practical solutions are within reach. First and foremost, the EU and its member states must honor their long-standing commitment to allocate 0.7% of GNI to official development assistance. This is not about charity. It is about global justice and shared responsibility. Meeting this target would inject billions of additional euros into the system. Second, the EU must drastically simplify its aid delivery mechanisms. Slashing the bureaucratic red tape would ensure that help arrives when it is needed most, not years later. Third, all loans to developing countries must be offered on fair and transparent terms. Outright debt cancellation should be seriously considered for the most heavily indebted nations. Fourth, there must be greater coherence between the EU's aid, trade, and investment policies. Trade agreements must include enforceable protections for labor rights and the environment, support local economies and small-scale producers, and avoid tied aid. Fifth, and perhaps most critically, there must be complete transparency in all financial flows. Public registries should clearly document where every euro goes, which projects it funds, and who the ultimate beneficiaries are. In conclusion, the European Union's role in global development is pivotal. It possesses both the financial resources and the institutional tools to be a powerful force for good. By making its aid programs larger, faster, and fairer, the EU can make a real difference in the global fight against poverty, disease, and climate change. The path forward requires a shift in priorities. It requires following the money trail not for the purpose of profit, but for the purpose of people. The money must not only leave Brussels, it must arrive safely in the schools, clinics, farms, and family homes of those who need it most. I'm Ray Montoya, and this is Economics.